Awesome. Thank you for the very kind introduction, Josh. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all you folks who decided to spend an hour with us today to kind of talk shop on professional services. It's not the most sexy topic in the world to most people, but I really think it's cool and I love talking about it. So thank you for spending the time with us. And as Josh said, please feel free to drop a question in the Q&A or comment in the chat, and we'll try to keep up with that as best we can, so that I'm not just preaching all day. But yeah, went for kind of a provocative title here. The cost of doing business, time is money, stop undervaluing your time. This really is just inspired by a lot of conversation that we've had with hundreds of consulting firms, dev shops, digital agencies over the last few years, and of course, our own experience in which kind of culminated into what I think is one of the biggest opportunities that most growing and evolving digital services companies have in their business. And that's really starting to identify the difference between planning to a billable capacity versus planning to a billable target. And but to kind of run through the agenda here, what we're going to cover, as Josh pointed out, is like, first of all, why do we care about utilization? I think that's obvious to most people, but we'll kind of recap it very quickly. And then again, talking about the difference of billable capacity versus billable target. We'll go into then from there how that billable capacity will drive revenue capacity and how planning to target is hurting your business. And from there, we'll kind of get into a little bit more detail about how we see a lot of organizations kind of undervaluing that time, and how they're thinking about the cost of doing business versus how more mature and established professional services organizations think about cost of doing business. And so hopefully from this talk, you guys can be inspired on how to like approach this problem differently. And obviously we can't cover everything in a solution to this problem under the sun in just 1 hour, but we're always open to more conversation or follow-up. And so first of all, why should we care? Well, we have recently done a bunch of surveying to companies that we work with, whether they're our customers or part of our product advisory group, or also just some people that we know from the bigger digital services community. And according to our survey, the number one problem in the market right now, the thing that people are talking about the most, is just this lack of confidence in what's going to happen over the next 12 to 36 months. The pending recession, whether we're in it or not, like this uncertainty is just the overwhelming theme that we've heard from the market. And if we break that down from our survey, it really shows its head in 3 different categories. One is unpredictable revenue. Do we have enough work to keep the lights on, to pay the bills? And talking about margin compression, as the global pressures of the economy are driving our costs up, and pressing creating more pressure to drive our price down. How are we going to deal with that margin compression? And finally, this seems to become a bigger and bigger problem every month, every quarter. It's this feeling that our team has that they're burned out. Even though many of them aren't, recording more than 40 hours in their timesheet, they still have this feeling that they're overwhelmed or just burned out. And so with all of these problems in mind, I think that what I would kind of point us to is this maturity model that we subscribe to here at Parallax, that is based on a survey that a company called SPI Research puts out every year. And so these numbers were extracted from the most recent survey from 2022. And I think that we've simplified things here a little bit. They have 5 levels of maturity in their model, but directionally, this is real data from that survey, real benchmark from actual professional service organizations surveyed. But we believe most organizations in this category are kind of feeling between heroic and operational. And heroic is where we all start. When we start these professional services companies, digital agencies, software companies, We do it because we are awesome at the craft. We want to do that craft in a way that's unique and better than everyone else. And because we are doing such a great job, because we have such a strong vision for excellence, before we know it, we're surrounded by great people who want to be a part of that as team members, and awesome customers who want to utilize our services in the craft. And being awesome, it helps us grow. But before we know it, we feel kind of reliant on the heroic effort of individuals instead of having like processes to help us be more measured and consistent. Then we hire smart people, like many of you likely on the call, to help us kind of evolve those services and those processes, so that, again, we can be more consistent, more predictable, and we can like work towards operational excellence. The best in class agencies and consultancies in the world, they go beyond that and they figure out how to not just be good at the craft and operations, but be always innovating and growing. They're forward looking, they're confident, they're making a lot more money. And if we kind of narrow in on this utilization target here, this utilization benchmark here, the majority of the company surveys, 80%, are kind of stuck at this like 60% point, which is just plain not good in billable utilization, in our opinion. 17% get upwards to 75%, which I think is a really solid place for you to target. I think 75%, if I were running a digital consultancy or a software shop, I'd be looking at an annual target of billable utilization of 75% as like something I'd want to stretch for. I think that would allow us some wiggle room in some of the other key performance indicators, such as growth, focus on those things. But the best of the best can do both. They can grow, they can be highly profitable, and they can have high utilization. But those are only 3% of the companies surveyed. And so utilization is important because, we need to be able to pay our people. We need to be able to, keep the lights on. And utilization really drives both our revenue and our profit. People are used to saying that utilization drives profit. That makes a lot of sense. The margin in our business is, how many of those billable hours have we utilized, for actual client billable work. But however, I think that people tend to kind of, conflate the two things, which I see as billable capacity and billable target, as the same thing. When we ask people in this industry, if I'm sitting down with a leader and kind of talking with them about the challenges or the opportunities in their business, I often say, hey, what's your target? What is your utilization target for the whole company? And they'll say, I don't know. It depends. It depends on the role. It depends on the month, But really, most commonly, what they mean when they say it depends is something like I've illustrated here, and that they expect to get lower billable utilization out of a role like a project manager compared to, say, someone who's like a designer or an engineer, or somebody on the front end who's like, doing more like practical work for the customer. Maybe they're an analyst for SEO or something. And again, they kind of have a different expectation for billable for these different roles. Though there's one problem with that, in that, that expectation for what the outcome would be, that billable expectation, is often also used to just define what they will actually set as the amount of work that they assign to people. And so when I say billable capacity, I don't mean what is the target utilization at the end of the quarter or the year. I mean, for each of these individual roles, whether it's a PM or UX or dev or QA, how many hours that is client billable work are you going to book them to each week? Now, I think that for some roles, like project manager, for example, or account manager, that might have some like new business part of their function, or maybe they're a team lead and there is some like truly, recurring work that they're going to do every single week that is just for the business. I understand how we set lower billable capacities for some roles. Though, I think that is often misunderstood by that, for a developer or a QA person or an analyst, who the majority of their week should be doing client billable work, we are still setting billable capacities that are well below 40 hours. It's not uncommon for me to see in these companies' businesses something like 85% as a billable capacity for an engineer or an analyst who, again, was hired to do the majority of their work in the craft, serving our customers, providing a lot of value in the work they do. And I think one more point there, I don't think we often enough recognize that like 85% is 34 hours. That's 6 hours less than we're paying, effectively these full-time employees for. 6 hours times 52 weeks. And so what do I mean? What's the difference? Why am I, so annoyed, I guess, by the conflating of the two terms, like billable capacity versus billable target? Well, you got to kind of think about it like the airlines do. If the airlines only ever sold to the exact number of seats they had in an airplane, knowing that like some people show up and some people don't, they would always have a few extra seats on the airplane, right? So if there's 100 seats and they say on average, about 5 or 6 people that book don't show up, they'd almost always have 5 or 6 empty seats. I think you can think about that in a similar way in the way that we plan capacity here. And so, we're often saying, I think that we can expect on average, about 85% of the hours for a developer. Well, that's 34 hours a week. So let's set the capacity to 34 hours. Let's book them to 34 hours. Well, then I think it's pretty obvious. The most that we should probably ever expect, but for a few exceptions, is 34 hours a week of billable work, right? I mean, if we're only assigning 34 hours a week to them, there are going to be peaks and valleys. We're ramping off a project or ramping up, or maybe some time gets spent on an internal project. But even in the best weeks, we're likely only to hit 34, right? So to think that we could get at the end of 6 weeks or 12 or 18, that we're going to hit that 84% or 85%, knowing that there's those peaks and valleys, just like the airplane knows that some people aren't going to show up for every flight, we're never going to hit that target, right? We certainly, it's not just a matter of whether or not sales sold enough work. I mean, that's always a thing. We're always going to have some, peak and valley to like the demand. But if we're planning at the max of our target, we'll never hit it, right? And so like, why does it matter again? I think that, first of all, I think that we have to understand that extra 6 hours in this 85% world, or, on average, is it actually, if you think about it across multiple roles, is that function of 50, 60, 85, is that actually averaging out to more like 70%, billable utilization, billable capacity for the whole company? How much is that 30% costing us? I think we all know that billable utilization, these billable hours, that leads to our revenue dollars, right? And so assuming some bill rates and whatnot, we can pretty easily calculate what our billable capacity is based on the number of people we have, again, maybe average bill rate that we have, and what we expect from utilization. Now, if this is our utilization, our capacity, our billable capacity of 85%, I'm probably going to expect 75. But if my billable target is 85%, great. So when we're having this conversation with people that we know, people in the industry, agency owners, I usually say, hey, okay, let's think about this. What is your revenue target for the year? And I have a little math equation in my head where I say, okay, if you have 33 people, it's 185. And I usually like to say a range. I kind of spit out a range of revenue saying, somewhere between, let's say, $7 and $9 million. Does that cut us somewhere where you're in? And they're like, yeah, kind of closer to the lower end of that range. And what I don't tell these people that I'm talking about, these leaders, is that I kind of benchmark or I kind of position the range starting from 60%, 65% upwards to 85%, knowing that most organizations are performing closer to that 60, 65%. I mean, the survey says, my experience says, most organizations are performing to that 60, 65%. And so when they come back to me and say, yeah, it's closer to that lower end, closer to 7 million, I say, okay, all right, well then, does that mean your billable utilization is something like 65%? And then they look at me like I'm crazy. They say, wait, no, I think it's higher than that. I'm like, well, okay, wait, is your goal higher than that? Is your billable capacity higher than that? Or is your billable target higher than that? Or is your actualized annual utilization higher than that? If your capacity is higher than that, you're probably never going to hit your capacity, right? If your target is higher than that, you might be measuring some things wrong. But if you're hitting $7 million in revenue and your actualized utilization is 85%, your bill rate is 185, and you have 33 people, something's not adding up. Either you don't actually have as many people as you tell me you have, and that happens sometimes. I remember I used to like puff my chest a little bit and say we had 50 people when it was more like 45. Maybe the actual bill rate that we're realizing is lower than 185 because we, writing some stuff off, or we have some fixed bid that we're overserving customers and we're kind of going over that margin. Or maybe that utilization is actually lower than what you think it is, of 85%. Because if all of these things add up, if 33, 185, 85, then you have a revenue capacity of $9,300,000. That's quite a difference from that 7 million that you said was kind of your target, right? For the year. And again, that going back to this other problem, and I'm going to pull up a spreadsheet that people often talk about, but it kind of depends. It's kind of depends on the different role, what my different capacity is. And so let's play around with that a little bit. So if we've got a pretty nice sized team here, we got some PMs, we got some UX people, we got some devs, some QA people, and here's kind of our expectation for billable capacity for each one of these folks. And let's be honest with ourselves and set billable targets that are a little bit less than that billable capacity. I just have a little lever in here that we could pull to say, I'm going to say it's about 10% less. You know what, heck, I'll make it even nicer. I'll say 5%. We're super good at kind of hitting the consistent planning, and we're only 5% of a target less what our capacity is. But I think that how does that break down? And so I've kind of used the basic math to figure out business days, holidays, estimated some PTO. I've calculated total capacity hours for the team. I've taken that billable target in mind, meaning that billable capacity less 5%. And with that, I've calculated based on our bill rates that we've set per role. I've calculated what our revenue capacity is, assuming every one of those people worked the total capacity that we've set. And so for PMs, it's 50%, for UX, it's 65, et cetera, right? That's our total revenue capacity. And then if we look at the net revenue capacity, that is, of course, this is the total revenue capacity, assuming they worked 40 hours. Net revenue capacity is assuming our set revenue capacity as by role, like I defined here. And then the revenue target, of course, is less that 5%. So I'm assuming you can hit your target in this model. I'm assuming that if you tell me your target for the entire company on average is whatever, 70%, that you're going to hit that, right? This isn't accounting for the fact that we might say its goal, the target is X, and we're going to hit just below that, right? So the real story I want to tell here is that if everyone just billed 40 hours, excluding vacation and holidays, we could do in Q1 $3 million. If we account for that planning or booking people to that capacity number, 50% for PMs, 65% for UX, 85% for dev, then our revenue capacity hitting those targets, hitting those numbers exactly would be 2.3. So it's about $700,000 less that quarter. And actual revenue target is accounting for that 5% delta between what we plan and what we actually expect in the target. That is nearly $1 million, I guess $850,000 less each quarter here in revenue because we planned to a lower capacity, right? And so before we kind of like go into like, we can't do that, the customers won't let it, all the objections related to that, let's just kind of think about this a little bit and say, what's the difference? What if I said, across the board, I want PMs to do more like 80. I want our billable capacity, meaning I can book people to this many hours a week in billable work. Our billable capacity for these other folks who aren't like in that account management, project management type role is more like 100%. We can book them to 40 hours. Like, look at the massive difference in what our revenue target is when we change that. There's just a massive difference between the before and after here. And let's look at the before. I don't have that slide. Before, I was saying that we lost nearly $1 million in opportunity for revenue each quarter. It was like 850. And now it's a couple $150,000. That revenue capacity with the same team. I didn't hire any more people. I didn't have to raise my bill rate. I just got better utilization out of this existing team. Back to my little calculator here, it's pretty easy to see. Again, if I wanted to do, let's say, $9 million with that same team, 90, that'd be real hard. And I was at that 65% utilization on average, I'd have to either raise my utilization to 82% on average, raise my bill rate to 234, or raise my headcount to 42, or some combination of all three of those things, right? And I know that all of those are possible, and those things are all things that we should consider. But there actually is, in my opinion, some very low-hanging fruit in just setting a different billable expectation, billable capacity for your key roles. Start booking them closer to 40 hours a week, and you will instantly create more revenue capacity without hiring more people, without having to figure out how to raise your rates. And, without trying to figure out how to squeeze more efficiency out of the utilization that you've got and come closer to your target. The idea is you raise the capacity of your team by expecting more of their 40 hours to be worked. Anonymous attendee, yes, I can give you a copy of this. And then there's a question, what assumption was wrong? What about the variable of client hours that end up unbilled? For example, dev work that was buggy. Should that be reflected in the lower anticipated billable rate or lower utilization? Neither. I think that depends. Is it fixed bid or is it time materials work? I think if it were fixed bid, that would wash out in the margin likely. And that's that's going to result in a lower effective bill rate. I would say whether it's TNM or fixed bid, in my opinion, you shouldn't plan for write-off hours like that. Like, you shouldn't plan in your utilization for write-off hours, even if hours are written off, whether it's TNM or fixed bid. I would still count them as billable hours in our utilization numbers, and that'll allow us to have like a more steady and stable plan versus actual hour tracking, so that we can get better at measuring the variance between those two. But yeah, back to this, the big story here is that, again, we are just telling our team now, instead of only assigning work out for 32 hours a week for a UX person or less, right? Like 34 hours a week, let's start assigning out at least 40 hours a week. Because we know there's going to be those peaks and valleys, right? I made a little sheet for that. We know there's going to be those peaks and valleys. If our capacity is 40, the variance on those peaks and valleys are still going to be there, but the majority of the time we are billing closer to 40 hours a week. We're getting those extra 6 hours or so. Scott asked the question that I anticipated, and I'll get to you, Scott. Before I do, I'll mention it quickly. Well, actually, it's a perfect transition, right? So, when I ask people, "Are you hitting your revenue target?" They say, "I think so," and if the answer is yes or no, it doesn't matter. I always lead with the next question of it. Well, is your goal high enough? And I say stuff like, your goal could be higher, just like I showed you. If we set those utilization capacities to be higher, those billable capacities to be higher, we set higher targets for utilization, we can make a lot more money. We can have a lot more revenue with the same team. And then I usually have, the response, okay, we're not running a sweatshop. What about the cost of doing business, right? And I'm saying, why can't we spend all of those 40 hours a week on client billable work, billing those 40 hours to our customers? And the people I talk to in this industry, they say things like, what about the internal meetings? What about the fact that these guys and gals have to eat lunch? These people, we need to care and feed our team. We need to make sure that they're getting the attention that they need, that the support they need to develop in their careers. We got to manage, the different things between projects. And I think that's true. All of those things are true. And all of those things, in my opinion, are the cost of doing business. But the professional services industry has been around for a long time. And this problem has been around for a long time. But I need to ask you as experts, what do you bring as value to your customer beyond just that deliverable in your craft? Let's say you're an SEO company that is providing the service of managing the SEO and SEM for a brand across 12 months. You know that there's certain methodologies that your analysts and your creatives are going to use to implement and develop and implement a strategy over those 12 months to have awesome SEO and SEM for that brand, right? And there may be some peaks and valleys of the effort related to delivering that service over the course of 12 months. But generally speaking, you know how many of those customers, those accounts, those brands, one or two analysts can serve in a given year. And so what if you thought about it that way? What if you said, I'm going to split those people between 3 or 4 different brands, and I'm going to allocate their time that way. I'm going to distribute their time across these 3 or 4 brands, and the calendar of implementing the strategy or developing the strategy for this SEO, SEM offering. Do you really need to break down every week by the specific task and get very granular and precise about when they're going to spend that time over 12 or 14 months? Or can you say, generally speaking, they're going to do 4 or 5 accounts at a time over the period of time, right? So can we break down our productized services based on an allocation distribution and not stretch them beyond 3 or 4 accounts? I mean, it's likely not practical, right? And then bill for that distribution. So if there's 5 accounts, 1 small, 1 medium, 2 large, maybe that's how you distribute their time over week. The smallest, the lowest percentage, the large, higher percentage, and that's what you bill of 40 hours, that percentage per account per week consistently. Yes, they have to do some team meetings. Yes, we have to do one-on-ones. Yeah, we have to eat lunch. Yes, we have to go to the bathroom. But all of those things are what the employee, the specialist, needs to be a good employee in the business. Those are the cost of doing business. You could say the same thing about a software development team, engineers or whatever. Their 40 hours, the entire 40-hour block is what we're selling. While maybe 38 of those hours, or maybe sometimes 36 of those hours, are going to be writing code or actually sliding a bar on some thing of how much we're going to spend on SEM. But all of that week is applied to client work on a whole, right? Yes, we have to do some one-on-one stuff. Yes, we have to do some HR stuff and eat lunch. But the clock doesn't stop on their 40-hour week on those simple functions for care and feeding for our employees, right? We need to cover those costs, but I argue those costs should be covered by our customer. And the best professional services organizations in the world understand this, and this is how they're pricing and selling their work. Meaning that, like, if, let's say for Target Corporation here in Minneapolis, they hire us to build a piece of software for them. They're hiring us because we have a great talent pool that we've built up. We have an ability to hire, attract, retain, develop amazing talent. They're hiring us because we have a great methodology that's proven for software engineering and product development, that we know that this talent is really consistent on delivering on. We know how to make sure that that talent is engaged and focused and not going to quit, through the duration of the project. They're paying for all those things. That's why we're the best in the world at building software for retail companies, for an example, right? They got to pay for the fact that we're good at all those things. If they were to hire any of those employees to try to build a product development team internally, which many companies have, they understand that they have to manage those people, they have to develop those people, they have to care for those people, that those people will have, opportunities to go to a larger team meeting. These are just part of what it costs to employ and to engage this awesome talent in this space. And so how can you start to maybe flip the way you think about that and understand that that's your customer's cost just as much as it is yours?
I'm going to come off mute because I think Mark has a really good question that applies to this. How do you bill that back to a client? What's your recommendation for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, I'll say that the best part about being in the professional services business is that every time you write a new proposal, every time you renew a contract, every time you introduce yourself to a new customer, it's an opportunity to reinvent yourself based on what you've learned over the past, year, 2 years, whatever, right? So professional services, we provide value to our customer because we are evolving our craft and our service offerings every single day. That is part of what makes us awesome. And it is the best part about the business model. So I'll say the easiest way to address the problem that Mark is talking about is to just start selling it different. Start selling it based on duration duration-based plans for the team, and based on allocations on those durations. So full-time, half-time, quarter-time. Don't sell it by a list of features, sell it by a duration and an allocation. Sell the methodology over a list of features, right? And then the second part is if you're already kind of deep into a customer and they're I guess maybe pushing back on this hour here was billed towards something internal, or this hour here was doesn't seem to be something I'm willing to pay for whatever reason. I think that in those engagements, I'd say the best advice I would give is to try to look for an opportunity to reposition yourself with those customers and stop sending the hourly breakdown of how you build your time. I know that that's easier said than done in some cases, but if it can't be done, I'd say start educating your team on how to write the notes in their time entries that are marketable to their customer. And so, I could go into more depth if you wanted to on that. That's my last ditch effort. I'd really refocus you towards the former, which is, start selling it different, start positioning yourself different, and maybe, get enough new work where you're selling it and executing it this way so that you'll feel confident going back to those legacy customers and saying, hey, we got to change. Another question Adam has is, if your company has 50% capacity, do you expect to bill 100% of the hours for the full team, or target 40 hours a week for 50% of the team? Company has 50% capacity. I'm not sure I understand that question. I think that maybe I'll just kind of very quickly go through my revenue capacity spreadsheet one more time. I think that like my recommendation is that, you minimize billable capacities, such as this one that we've kind of highlighted here for PM. PM's like usually the hardest one for us to kind of justify like a full-time, half-time, quarter-time allocation when we're selling our customers. So I kind of pause a little bit there. And I'll say that again, what I would recommend is that for those craft people, such as designers or analysts or consultants or developers or quality assurance people, that we are really setting a capacity of 40 hours a week. So, that means that like when we have the work, we're going to book them all the way to 40 hours a week. But we still know that like, maybe even we say, there's a 10% delta between what we book them to and what their target is, because, we're not going to always hit our goal, right? So maybe our target for those people that we bill, or we book to 100% or 40 hours, maybe the target is more like 90, right? And that gives you a lower net revenue capacity, or target revenue capacity based on that. Does that answer the question, Adam? Cool. I think it does. Okay, and so then, the last question that I want to make sure that I cover, because I often ask people is like, hey, what are you doing with that extra 6 or 8 hours each week? When I see people that are booking their team or like, planning to only 32 or 34 hours a week, I'm like, what are you doing with those extra 6 hours, right? Like if you're saying the billable capacity of an engineer or designer or an analyst is 85%, I said, okay, great. Like, what is with that extra 6 hours then? How are you spending it? What are you doing with it? Right? Because that's a lot of like potential revenue, right? And they're like, oh, we're going to use that for like personal development or like some downtime because they're stressed out, or a bunch of things that kind of related to, in my opinion, just like being cool humans to our employees and not making sure that we show that we care about them, right? And I appreciate that and I understand that. But I think that like there's a big opportunity, in my opinion, to better utilize that money, better invest that money in our people. And, for example, like if your bill rate's $185 an hour and, you are expecting an only billable, you set billable capacities at 85% of only 34 hours a week. That means 6 hours a week you're investing into that employee. And that 6 hours has a very large, in my opinion, opportunity cost. We could be billing a lot of those hours to our customers at that $185 rate. So there's over $1,000 a week that we're investing in that employee. Before you think about buying them AirPods or like sweet laptops or whatever, what could you do with $1,000 a week? $1,000 a week, that's a lot of money. First of all, like that adds up, I know it's not every week, we're not talking about every 52, but just for the sake of this discussion, that's nearly $60,000 annualized. That 6 hours a week that we're just kind of trying to be cool people is nearly $60,000 annualized, right? And in this climate where, our costs are going up and the price pressure from our customers is coming down, and we're worried about these great people leaving us because we can't compete with the Amazons and the Microsofts of the world trying to steal our people. Like maybe we could give them a more like representative pay bump this year compared to what the rest of the industry is paying people. I hope it's not all of that $60,000, but maybe it's more than a 10% or 5% pay bump, right? Secondarily, we're hearing a lot like, oh, it's for them to like, develop their skills. It's for them to like invest in their developing their craft. I'm like, great. What are the programs that you've designed that are going to make sure that you've like positioned them to really be able to utilize those 6 hours to get for them, those employees, to get a lot of value out of those 6 hours? What are you doing to support them investing in their craft in that like 6 hours, right? Because I'll tell you what, when these guys are feeling burned out, when they're stretched too thin, when the pressures of the client's projects are kind of building up on them, you think they're spending their 6 hours constructively each week? Probably not. And how often are they also like maybe like cheating in a few hours on client work, but they don't want to bill it because they don't want to get yelled at for going over budget on a ticket. Like the truth is, like, I haven't seen, and I don't mean to offend anyone out there, but I haven't seen people effectively use these hours in a way that actually helps these employees develop on a consistent basis. But let's say, what if, forget about the raise stuff and all that. What if you just took 2 weeks out of the year and you said, I'm not going to have you work at all those weeks, right? We're just going to take 2 weeks off altogether, right? And we're going to take some of the money that we earned, from having you actually like booked to 6 hours to the full 40 hours each week, and we're going to invest in you. You could, even taking those 2 weeks out, you could still invest, $10,000 or more in like an actual program where we send someone somewhere for actual training for 2 weeks. And what do you think at the end of the year the employees are going to value more? Are they going to value this like kind of like 6 hours that's kind of like, like you could use it if you really can use it? Or are they going to value a program that you created that allows them 2 weeks a year to go on some sort of sabbatical with $10,000 budget to learn? I'm being a little extreme here, hoping to kind of like sell on the concept that this difference in what you plan to for a capacity and what your target is just a giant problem, in my opinion, in the industry. And so, again, there's a lot of strategies and tactics in the way that we sell and position our company's services so that we can confidently book and plan people to 40-hour weeks without asking our employees to work more than 40 hours a week and without putting them in a position where they're going to be burned out. That's for a different conversation, and happy to continue this in person or over Slack or Zoom or whatever. But for today, I think the big takeaway that I hope that you guys all have is that you should build a spreadsheet or use this spreadsheet to just start the conversation internally and start to think about like what is our billable capacity versus what is our billable target, and what does that mean for the revenue that we expect from our company. Because I would imagine a lot of you who are thinking, yeah, we do about 85% utilization. We're trying real hard not to burn out our people. You're the same people who are telling me that the expectation that you have for revenue is far below what your, in my opinion, actual capacity is. And you're struggling to figure out how to be profitable, how to grow, and how to pay people effectively. So with that, I'm going to kind of bounce back to my Q&A slide. And Josh, are there any ones that kind of popped up that we haven't covered yet?
I'm looking through the list. You've done a nice job of being self-sufficient by answering them. I guess this question, Adam's had a handful here, but for project managers specifically, I know we talked about this in the prep that, hey, that's kind of a unique situation, but the question is, do you expect that a PM can only manage 4 to 5 accounts at a time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is another big discussion, but I believe that project managers, account managers do have a limit to the number of accounts or projects that they should be managing in any given time. I've seen a lot of other guidance from consultants in the professional services world who are like consulting with other professional services companies to say that when you price your work, you should say, here is a list of all the deliverables and a range of hours for each deliverable. And you should sum up all the deliverable hours and then apply like a percentage for project management on the sum of those hours. Say it's 1,000 hours of development work, that we would apply 10% percentage for PM. I think that is a very bad practice. I think that no matter if a project is very large or very small, there is a minimum number of hours per week that a project manager will be spending on any project. It's probably different based on the different service offerings that you guys have, but just for an example, if you're building websites, I believe that sometimes the $50,000 websites that might be, a much smaller amount of like development and design and QA hours than say a $500,000 website. I believe that the time that a project manager should spend week to week on that small one, 50 versus the big one, 500, is actually often more per week on the small one. I think that those smaller projects in some cases take more care and feeding than the larger ones that have like a more a longer schedule with a little bit more wiggle room in a schedule than these small ones that are budgeted very tight. And in that, traditional model where you're doing the Excel spreadsheet and you lined up all the deliverables with a range of hours, and then you apply that PM tax at the bottom, that's how all of our project managers in the smaller, less mature agencies and consultancies want to like pull their hair out all the time, because they're never given enough hours. The organization doesn't value their time. They think that the customers don't value their time, where again, I think some of those smaller projects even need more care and feeding on a weekly basis. So yes, absolutely. I think it was Adam who asked that question, or I wholeheartedly believe that the project management allocation across week over week projects needs to be a function of what that project actually needs each week. And I think that if it's less than a couple hours on any project, I think you're crazy. I think it needs to be more like 25% of their week, maybe at least 10% of their week, depending on what your service offerings are.
All right, we've got two questions that I'm going to try to meld together because I think they're like pretty tied to each other. But like, when you look at the time, are you looking at like that utilization, that 100% utilization goal, right? Are you looking at it on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, quarterly, annual? And then the second question to that, which I think is very related to that, is what explains the difference between total revenue capacity and net revenue capacity if you're billing for the cost of business? So if you are doing those things that you were talking about billing back for some of that, other time, how over the long run do those things kind of make more sense, I guess, Tom?
Yep, perfect. So let's see. I think the first question, let's like look at this spreadsheet here. It's very simple. Like, I think, sorry, the first question again, I kind of
the duration. Like, how do you look at?
Okay, like, so yeah, the target should be like in month, quarter, year, not week. I think that again, the weeks are going to fluctuate with a variance that's much higher than the month or the quarter or the year, right? So you should set your utilization target based on like a variance that you can expect between what is your billable capacity and what you think you're going to get over that period of time, right? So in my little sheet here, I have this like variance or delta that I could say, I kind of expect like if our total capacity is 40 hours, let's say 10% less variance is what we're kind of put in there, right? So that is what I'm kind of saying is the difference between what our total capacity is and what our target is, because there's going to be those peaks and valleys now, right? And then if you're doing, like I said, and for every role in the company, if you're selling it to the total capacity, that 40 hours a week, there should be a lot less variance between the total revenue capacity, and your net revenue capacity, because for everybody, I'm booking them to 40 hours a week. I only point this out because I think that some organizations might have people on the team. Instead of a PM, let's look at like maybe a strategist, where a strategist kind of splits their time between, like, they do a lot of outbound like selling effort before we get new customers, and then they do a lot of like when we have customers like working the strategy. So you might have a true billable capacity there of 50% because they're splitting between the two big functions in the business, right? And so that might be a better use case for like a 50% billable capacity. But the difference again between net and total is just that billable capacity expectation, right? And that target again is just whatever you expect the delta to be between what you can book them to and what over time, whether it's a quarter or a year, the variance will be. So this is like the spreadsheet. The Josh and the marketing team will make this a leave behind for you guys. Obviously, it's something I like put together in a couple hours to prepare for this talk, really to just tell that story of like, stop undervaluing your time. When you go back to the model where these people are at 85%, you're just kind of undervaluing the time, the delta between this 3 million and this 2.4. That 600K is just time that you've chosen to say is invaluable. And I will say that A, it's very valuable, B, it's likely because you kind of have this like feeling of the cost of doing business. And so I think that when you're positioning your services, when you're positioning the value of the time that your people are spending each week, like maybe give it some thought of like how, why you can't split that up into quarter weeks and say, each one of my 4 customers that this analyst or programmer or whatever is on has to share part of the cost of doing business. I would challenge you to think that way. That's how the industry leaders are doing it. And I think these are a lot easier things to change quickly than trying to figure out how to raise your bill rates, trying to find a way to reduce the write-offs and stuff like that. Like, this is just a very basic thing that you're kind of planning to underutilize your team, and then you're surprised when the utilization is low.
Awesome.
I think we have room for one more question if there's any. It can be on or off this topic, of course.
Any tips for resource sharing? Let me read this one. Plan for week on week, how much of maybe we can answer that one separate. It seems pretty specific. I guess that an overarching thing is, Adam asks again, if we are moving from 80 to 100%, is the client getting more work, or are we simply billing more?
I hope that the customer is getting more work. Absolutely. I think that there's 6 more hours in the week potentially. Maybe not exactly 6, because maybe you're not today billing them for their lunch break or something. But like, again, like, do you think they turn their brains off at lunch? Like your clients are already getting the value of that half hour that they go to lunch, when their brains are still working on this problem that they were trying to solve. When they roll back their chair and talk to a friend about another project, we're not typically charging that other project that this other engineer is helping with. And that stuff all kind of, comes out in a wash, right? So think about it like if your customer fired you, and then had to replace you by hiring the great talent that you've got, building the methodology that you've kind of aligned your team around that provides so much value, and providing the care and feeding that all of those people need to be effective, to make sure that you retain them, that you continue to develop them, that they're engaged and focused on the right stuff. If your client tried to do that, they would be paying for all of that effort, related to that week that your customer, your employee is spending with them. So yeah, maybe you're billing them more. Hopefully you look at it as they're getting a lot more value, and it's not, those aren't mutually exclusive. I do think though, in some cases, when you move to a like duration-based planning and billing model, you will see some of your estimates might look a little higher, but I would argue that a number of things are going to happen. One, I think that you are going to have a lot less overrun, because those projects that are planned based on deliverable typically have at least 10% greater overrun than the projects that aren't, that are planned on a duration. So I think you'll have less overrun. I think they're going to be more accurate, but yeah, they might appear to be a little bit more expensive at the beginning before you get good at this. And then I think there's one more question. I don't know if we have time for it.
I think we're up, Tom. We're at 12:59.
Okay.
And I'm going to do a few plugs here. So we will try to get back to people. We have all this documented, the questions. If we didn't answer your question, we'll try to be good about getting back. But we have a really good blog post. We'll send this out as a follow-up on the cost of doing business. So this topic, and it's not like it goes into some detail and it's applicable. Also, these webinars are great. We're going to continue to do them and all that, but we have Tom has actually started a new video series. Go follow him on LinkedIn. You can follow us on Insta as well, Parallax on Insta. But we're going to be dropping regular videos, more bite-sized than this, on these same type of topics. And we would love you to debate, be part of that conversation. So we can do this in like a digital way as well. So thank you guys, everybody, for showing up and listening to our perspective on the topic. Come back, join us again for the next one, and we'll see you guys all soon. Cheers.
Thank you. Appreciate it.